Dear devotees and friends, after the corona pandemic started in 2020, the entire world was forced to slowly adopt new ways of holding programs and meetings. Dear devotees and friends, after the corona pandemic started in 2020, the entire world was forced to slowly adopt new ways of holding programs and meetings. Online method gradually became the new norm. For the last 2 years, Advaita Ashrama has been conducting virtual programs regularly, and therefore I request all of you to subscribe to Advaita Ashrama's YouTube channel to get access to all these interesting videos. Today, after 2 years, we are for the first time holding a physical program. And for this program, we have with us dear Swami Sarvapriyananda ji of Vedanta Society of New York. Swami Sarvapriyananda ji does not need an introduction. In the recent times, he has emerged as one of the very successful preachers in the Ramakrishna order who has spread the message of Vedanta and the Holy Trio all over the world. And we are today extremely delighted to have him with us. But my delight is also combined with a sense of regret that I could not be physically present for this program. I had to leave for Mayavati for some urgent work. Nevertheless, I shall be watching the program on the YouTube. I heartily welcome Swami Sarvapriyananda ji and also thank him sincerely for giving Advaita Ashrama time from his busy schedule. We are all eagerly waiting to hear from him today, and I'm sure this session will be as interesting and illuminating as all his talks usually are. I also thank Swami Chidekananda ji of Belur Math, who so gladly agreed to come here and sing devotional songs for this occasion. Even he does not need an introduction, as he is known to the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna as an acclaimed singer. My sincere thanks to Swami Chidekananda ji. I now request Swami Chidekananda ji to carry forward the program.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Hello? Hello?
Can you all hear me?
Om Namah Shri Vivekananda Vivekananda Sundari Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Vivekananda. Namaste everybody, and welcome to Advaita Ashrama after a very long time. My humble pranams to Revered Maharaj and also to all the monks here, and my loving regards and namaskars to Prabuddha Bharata. Also, just to know that we have two special guests, Swami Chidekananda ji and Swami Vivekananda ji sitting with us and joining us today. So actually today, I was telling our manager Maharaj I think that we might have made history today in the Advaita Ashrama, even in all of RKM, because this may be one of the first times that both the invited speaker and the invited singer both have multi-million views on YouTube. And so, and Swami Vivekananda ji, through his bhajans, actually this was all calculated by Advaita Maharaj. We wanted Maharaj to start with Dvaita, then Vishishta Dvaita, then Achintya Bheda Bheda, then Bheda Bheda, then Shuddha Dvaita. And now we want to come, now we're all soaked in bhakti, and we all have Chitta Shuddhi, and we're ready for you to take us to Advaita. Now many of you have seen Revered Maharaj's videos. I think that he has one video, Who Am I? It has over 4.3 million hits. And it's the pride of our entire organization that Maharaj has been so successful. But the impact of his talks go beyond the mere numbers. They are not, as we say, empty calories. For example, in the Kolkata book fair and all over, he's adding something, what Sri Ramakrishna described in the Kathambita, Vyakulata, this spiritual yearning. He's adding to spiritual practitioners all over the world. And one classic example of this is that for brahmacharis who want to join our order, they have to go to Bellarmont and complete a form. Now in the form, one part of it says, who inspired you to join? And now some of the brahmacharis are now writing, not a person, the lectures of Swami Sarvapriyananda. And beyond that, you already know that he's the head minister of the Vedanta Society of New York, and he attended the Harvard University in 2019. 2019. So one prominent scholar who's in charge of the program, the Nobel Fellowship, is that right? Dr. Francis Clooney. At first he did not know who Maharaj was, even though he was enrolled in the program. But every day for a couple of months, he said every other person kept asking him, I've seen Maharaj's videos online. So then he came to the conclusion that Maharaj is an absolute superstar. And actually the point of this program is not just, we have hundreds of lectures online, but beyond the talks, beyond the numbers, some of us have some inside information. And one of the reasons I invited Maharaj and I talked to Advaita Maharaj is because of the life he leads. So Gandhiji wrote one book, Experiments with Truth. So these are sadhus, they don't really talk about themselves. Okay, they don't talk about, but all the things that they're preaching, in Bangla one word, antari, meaning from inside out. So this is the main reason that we're here today. The first Maharaj I will be interviewing him about an article entitled Consciousness and Self in Advaita Vedanta. This article was published in the Prabuddha Bharata 2020 January edition. And you can download it and read it afterwards. In the first part of this interview, I will ask Maharaj to briefly summarize the main points of the article. And then I will ask first a set of questions regarding the theoretical nature of Advaita Vedanta. But secondly and most importantly, I will ask him questions about how can we apply these principles in real time, not just in our daily life and not just in our meditation, but in real time in the heat of the moment. So with that, I humbly request Maharaj to please summarize the contents of his article.
Thank you, Deepak Maharaj. I am very grateful to the immediate Adhyaksha of Advaita Ashrama and his team of monastics for inviting me here. It's wonderful to be back in India, wonderful to be back in Advaita Ashrama. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. Chidananda Sindhu Nire Premananda Lavani. In the ocean of consciousness, there arises this wave of bliss. Now, I think that's the most. Is that a revelation? No. So, that makes it. So, in the ocean of consciousness, there arises this wave of bliss. Yeah, that's better, I think. I think that's the most beautiful description of Advaita Vedanta. And what we are going to speak about now is exactly that. Is exactly the discussion on the real nature of consciousness. Christoph Koch, who is one of the leading neuroscientists of the world, is the chief scientist of the Paul Ehrlich Brain Institute, he, in a recent interview, recent means about a couple of years ago, he said consciousness is the most important thing in the world. And he explained it in this way. He said, if somebody gives me $1 billion and says that in return I just want your consciousness, you will not be conscious, but you will be a billionaire. Will I agree? Of course not. I can give out a limb, maybe I'll give out a part of my body and donate a kidney or something, and if I can get $1 billion. But if somebody says donate your consciousness, you will get $1 billion, you will be a billionaire, but you will not be conscious anymore, ever. Will I agree? Nobody will agree. Nobody will agree. That means consciousness is the most precious thing that we have. See, if I don't have eyes, I won't be able to see. I'll still be aware. If I don't have ears, I won't be able to hear. I'll still be aware. I'll be able to see, I'll be able to think, I'll be able to feel. But if I don't have consciousness, then there's nothing. Everything is blank. I have no knowledge, no awareness of anything, no life, no existence, nothing at all. Consciousness is the most important thing in our lives, is the most important thing in the world, for us. And so interesting that consciousness is the most important thing in the world was not the object of any kind of scientific inquiry until recently. Scientists became interested in consciousness only recently, only in the recent past 20-25 years, consciousness studies has become a very important subject. But consciousness studies is not a new subject. Professor Evan Thompson, he wrote this book, Waking, Dreaming, Being. He's a professor of philosophy in the University of British Columbia in Canada. In that book he says, in that book he says that consciousness studies is not a new subject. More than 5,000 years ago, consciousness was the object of investigation by the rishis of the Upanishads. And he said that this is so significant, the way consciousness was dealt with in the Upanishads, that he says we should date our history not with AD and BC, you know. He says that we should date our history with before Upanishad and after Upanishad. He says that there is such a quantum jump in the in human progress, the study of consciousness in the Upanishads. In recent times, what has happened is, I think a little bit because of the advances in imaging technology, in this brain scanning, we can study the brain much more carefully now at much greater depth than we could earlier. Because of the development of computer science, the advent of artificial intelligence, some of these reasons, there's an added interest in consciousness studies now. An Australian philosopher, David Chalmers, he's one of the leading philosophers in the world today, he coined this term, the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness. If you Google it, that's the central issue in consciousness studies today. What is this hard problem of consciousness? See, in consciousness studies, it's helpful to categorize what they are studying into two categories. the so-called easy problems of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness. So-called easy is not easy, but still comparatively. So-called easy problems of consciousness are that whatever we are, we are feeling, thinking, speaking, doing, whatever we are doing, there is some brain activity associated with it. So right now I'm speaking, you are listening, there's something going on in our brains, and that can be mapped by modern imaging technology, by scanning the brain. So something that we do, some kind of conscious experience that we have, and we correlate, the corresponding activity in the brain is mapped. So when you are talking, when you're thinking, when you're feeling something, pleasure, pain, emotions, what's happening in the brain, at what part of the brain, what neurons are firing, that kind of mapping, one-to-one mapping, that's being done. That's a huge area of study. And as I said, it's not easy. Of course, it requires a lot of technology and a lot of hard work. But still, it's basically a science of correlations. But the hard problem of consciousness is, how can these tiny little electrical activity in the brain, how can it translate into, how can it become our first person experience of life? That means right now, all of us are conscious. And if you ask us, what do we mean by consciousness? Anybody whom we ask, we will say, well, I am aware, I see, I hear, I smell, I taste, I touch, I think, I remember, I desire, I love, I hate, I meditate, I dream. All of these are conscious experiences. From tiny bursts of electrical activity in the brain, how do you get these? The color of a red rose, the voice of a beloved person, the sharp sting of pain. How do these experiences come from tiny bursts of electricity? Where is the connection? How do you make a jump from something as physical as activity in this lump of grey matter into the first person, the lived experience of life? This is the hard problem of consciousness. And unfortunately, or fortunately, there is no way of reducing this first person experience of living, this consciousness, what we call consciousness, into just literally the physical activity going on in our brains. And that's the problem. Why is it a problem? The problem is somewhere, there is another philosopher, Galen Strasser, in the University of Austin, Texas. He calls it the hard problem of matter. He sort of jokingly said, see, we have already assumed somehow, we means mostly consciousness studies experts, scientists, mainstream scientists today, we have assumed somehow that the brain is the basis of consciousness. It's sort of received knowledge, understood, unquestioned somehow. And then we think the brain is generating consciousness somehow, and then we don't understand how is the brain generating consciousness. And that's the hard problem of consciousness. Now, consciousness was the subject of study in ancient India. The reason was that the philosophies of ancient India, the various Hindu philosophies, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and the various schools of Vedanta, as also the various schools of Buddhism, Jainism, all were interested in, they're very practical, they're interested in how to remove suffering, how to overcome suffering, how to attain bliss, how to attain fulfillment in life. And so removing the suffering of the self, attaining fulfillment for oneself, and they very soon found there is a very deep connection between self, you, I, and consciousness. So they became interested not only in the self, but in consciousness. And so they evolved over a period of several thousand years, different theories of consciousness. There is not one Indian theory of consciousness, there is a whole spectrum. There is the Nyaya theory of consciousness. The Jainas developed much, and even we need to study that more. It's not studied enough. The Jaina theory of consciousness, different Buddhist schools developed a theory of consciousness. But today what we are going to look at is the Advaita Vedanta school of consciousness. The concept of consciousness in Advaita Vedanta, marginally in Sankhya. And just by the way, David Chavez, who is in NYU, New York University, his latest book, Reality Plus, I haven't read it all, but I immediately flipped to the index. to see whether he mentions Indian philosophy at all. And he has mentioned Advaita, he has mentioned Sankhya. These are the two schools he mentions. We will see what is the nature of consciousness that is talked about in Advaita Vedanta. That was what the article was actually leading up to. And so it will come up in our discussion as we go on. It's not very different from what Maharaj was singing about. Chidananda Shintu Nire Premananda Lavati. That is basically the Advaita idea of consciousness. What he beautifully sang about, I was just thinking that in that song, Maharaj to shab bure dile nati bala rase. So what he has sung so beautifully, we will make it boring. We're talking about it, we'll analyze it. Alright, take that.
Okay, Maharaj. Because you wrote about different things in your article. That's one. You also wrote about a few other things. So, on that point, can you speak a little bit about panpsychism and briefly explain the philosophy of panpsychism? What are the similarities between panpsychism and Advaita Vedanta? And as well as how does each philosophy view this empirical reality and its relationship with consciousness?
Panpsychism. It's in Bengali, Kalbora Kotha. Big terms. See, it's David Chalmers has been speaking about it recently. It's not a new idea. It's been there in ancient Greek philosophy, in Western philosophy also, and also in Indian thought. Basically, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental reality and it is ubiquitous. That means it's everywhere in the universe. That's basically panpsychism. Why this term comes up? When David Chalmers says that you cannot reduce consciousness into brain activity. There is no way of saying how is this activity, this electrical activity going in the brain, how is it generating consciousness? There's no way of doing that. In fact, if you see all the literature that is going around now, it's a hot topic of discussion. Every other week you will find an article. Either it will say consciousness explained. I often say it's consciousness explained away. So consciousness explained. Many of those articles are like that. Or the articles will be why consciousness cannot be explained. Either of these two. And sort of widely fluctuates between these. So David Chalmers says in one of his talks, he has said this, that perhaps we have to consider this wild idea, so-called wild idea. This idea was very common in India 5,000 years ago, but wild idea. What is this wild idea? That perhaps consciousness is not brain activity. Perhaps consciousness is a fundamental reality of the universe. See, whenever you cannot reduce some phenomena into more basic phenomena, you have to say that is a fundamental phenomenon. So just like matter, energy, time, space, we may have to accept, he says, that there is a fundamental reality called consciousness. Right now, the mainstream idea is consciousness is brain activity. But if you cannot actually show how brain generates consciousness, you might have to accept one day that consciousness is a fundamental reality in this universe. Present everywhere.
Let me just stop you. A fundamental reality within this time-space network.
Yes. The fundamental reality in this universe. Like time, space, matter, energy, is one more reality called consciousness, which you cannot reduce to anything else. That's the basic idea of panpsychism. David Chalmers humorously, he says, somebody asked him, oh, this is talking about panpsychism. He says that, look, if you think long enough about the hard problem of consciousness, you will either become a panpsychist or you will go into administration. That means you become an administrator. The idea is that administrators are looked down upon in universities, they're non-academicians. So that's the basic idea. But Advaita Vedanta would not agree with that. Advaita Vedanta doesn't say that there are so many these material realities and one more reality called consciousness. Rather, first of all, consciousness is the fundamental reality in which appear time, space, matter, energy, body, mind. Advaita Vedanta makes a distinction between mind and consciousness. We must not lose sight of the fact that when in modern consciousness studies, they talk about consciousness, they don't make a distinction between mind and consciousness. if you see books on consciousness studies, what are they talking about? What we would normally call mind, thoughts. If you ask a modern consciousness studies expert, please give me some examples of consciousness. He will say, well, you're thinking, you're feeling, you're perceiving, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. From a Vedantic perspective, these are activities of the mind, of the Sukshma Sharira, of the subtle body. And all of them are illumined by consciousness, revealed by consciousness. Not just Advaita Vedanta, even Sankhya will say that. So, but in general, why I talk about panpsychism sometimes in relation to Indian philosophy is, at least it's a big step forward. Instead of reducing consciousness into brain by saying that consciousness is nothing but brain activity. Professor Arindam Chakravarti calls it nothing buttery. Nothing but this. Consciousness is nothing but brain. Brain is nothing but matter. It's like that. Instead of doing that, we say that consciousness is a reality in itself. And that we say is a big advantage, a big step forward. What kind of reality? There's a difference between how Indian philosophy perceives it and what a panpsychist like David Chalmers might say.
Okay, Maharaj. Now I would like to shift gears a little bit. And I'll just, in the second part of this article, actually Maharaj made a really original point that I have not seen before. And I think it's his own paradigm. He wrote, each of us as spiritual seekers and each great religion of the world can be classified as belonging to one of two categories, that and you. Please explain what is meant by this.
It's not my idea. And almost nothing that I say, I'm very unoriginal actually. So almost nothing that I say is my own idea. I've got it from somewhere or the other, and most of what I say is usually 5,000 years old. And this YouTube has made a special problem for me. Sometimes people say that, will you tell us something new this time? And unfortunately, I don't have anything new to offer. What I've got to offer is 5,000 years old, basically. So this idea also is actually based on the Mahabharata. And this I read in the writings of a sadhu in Uttarakhand. It's available only in Hindi, unfortunately. So, but I sort of translated this idea into English. Basic idea is this. We all know the central idea of Advaita Vedanta is the Mahavakya, Tattvamasi. You are that. Shvetaketu's father tells him that that means you are Brahman, you are the ultimate reality, which is the core idea of Advaita Vedanta. But notice, Tattvamasi, that thou art. Tat and Tvam, that, and Tvam, thou art you. Now if you think a little bit, and that Sadhu has written in his writing, if you think a little bit, all the religions of the world, they fall in these two categories. Either they are worshipping, the religion is about worshipping God. Tat, in Advaita Vedanta, in Upanishadic language, Tat means that from which the universe is created, in which the universe exists, into which the universe finally disappears. This is a classic definition of God in all theistic religions, a creator God. So Tat means God, Ishvara, Bhagavan, Saguna Brahman, Father in heaven, Allah. So Tat means God. Now there are so many religions of the world which are God-centered. And Tvam means I, the individual being. There's a religious approach which is based on self-inquiry, which is based on inquiry into oneself, not on God. So the first category, the God-centered religions, they called theistic religions. Christianity, Islam, Judaism. In Hinduism, there's a whole spectrum of theistic religions. Shaivism, Shaktism, when Sri Ramakrishna worships Ma Kali. That is a that-centered religion, God-centered, Ma-centered religion. So these are called, let's call them that-centered, Tat. And there are religions which are based on self-inquiry. Buddhism doesn't talk about God. In fact, some Buddhist teachers actually dismiss the existence of God. Jainism does not talk about God. What do they talk about? Oneself. Inquiry into what we are, and from that we will attain. Remember, the goal is the same. overcoming suffering and attainment of fulfillment of bliss, of satisfaction. So by inquiring to the self, by investigation to self, you will go beyond suffering. Now, theories are different, philosophies are different, but they are centered around self-inquiry. This is well understood in India because we have such a wide range of religions and philosophies. It's not so well understood in the West. In the West, because it's mostly a heavily Christian culture, so religion is basically God. And therefore religion is sort of based on faith in God. In fact, the word that is used for religion in America is faith. They'll ask you, what is your faith? But it's difficult to call Buddhism a faith, or Advaita Vedanta a faith, or Sankhya a faith. Even yoga, Patanjali yoga is not a faith. So, there are these two categories of religions. One is based on God, the other one is based on self-inquiry.
So that means all of us here, all spiritual aspirants, we either fall into the that or the that category, or the that or the you category.
Actually, these are two psychological types, broadly speaking. Again, all of these are general, like very, very broad generalizations. If we think about ourselves, our interest in religion, we are all here because we are interested in religion. But if you think about our interest in religion, some of us we are seeking God. We are devoted to God, we are seeking God. There's another kind of approach. Many of us here will feel, well, it's alright, Bhagavan ko bhalo, but my main interest is in who am I, or what am I. I can see when I say I'm seeking God, some people nod yes. When I say who am I, I'm interested in my own reality, again some other people are nodding. That means clearly there are these two psychological types. Now some of us may be both, but your weightage will be on one side rather than on the other side. So there are these two categories.
So looking at that theory, so what about the two things? You can answer number one. Can a person change can they change from that into thou, or thou into that over time? Or are these like fixed categories that we have a swabhavika, one type of nature, and that's going to follow us throughout our entire life?
Ultimately, these categories don't stand actually. See, notice that when I said Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Vaishnavism, Shaktaism and all that, I did not mention Advaita. I kept Advaita aside. See, Sankhya, Yoga, those are all self-inquiry based approaches. Buddhism, Jainism. Advaita Vedanta is Tattvamasi. Both. What Advaita Vedanta wants to say is, those who are on the path of God realization and those who are on the path of self-realization, both will reach the same reality. One Sufi saint put it very nicely, Muslim. He says that when I searched for Allah, I found only myself. When I inquired into who I am, I found only Allah. That is a Mahavakya. That's equal to Tattvamasi. Ultimately, we will all reach that understanding. That's why many of the philosophies in India, they are not strictly in one category or the other. You see, there will be an element of self-inquiry, then God. Or element of God, faith in God, and then realization of who am I.
That was the next question. Like Vishishtadvaita, they say that first, even though apparently it seems like that religion, but the first step is this realization of the Atma Avalokana, one that's separate from the mind-body complex. So would that be like a third category? That thou?
I mean, broadly speaking, Vishishtadvaita would be a that-centered religion, God-centered religion, because ultimately it's God who's important. Ultimately leading to God realization, or Paramatman or Narayana who's important. But yes, you're right. That first of all, there's an understanding of that I am not the body, not the mind, I am consciousness. And then this individual consciousness, its relationship to the cosmic consciousness, that is Vishishtadvaita. I am a part of that.
Relationship within the system. So again we notice that they are not strictly either category. They are not strictly that centered or thou centered. And Advaita Vedanta is the best example of this scientific.
It clearly states that the reality which you are worshipping as God, the reality which the yogins and the Sankhyans find within, is basically the same reality.
Now, Maharaj, in the Leela Prasanga, which is the great master, Sri Ramakrishna talked about, he used to classify his devotees into two types, the Shiva and the Vishnu. I'm sure you read that. So, how does that work with this, what you talked about, that and thou? Would Shiva are those both that categories? Or would Shiva be considered thou and Vishnu would be considered that? And the reason why I'm asking that is because the practical relevance is that I think what Thakur is, we have to know our own nature, and then it's the easier path for us, right? If we know our own nature, whether we're that or thou or Vishnu or Shiva, then it's easier for us to progress in our path.
I don't think that's what he was talking about. I mean, it's not the that-centered and thou-centered, the difference. I think he's talking about something else there, the very nature of the devotee, Shiva nature and the Vishnu nature. There, I think both of them would be a God-centered approach. Okay.
How is it, they use the term accurate self-assessment. So, in our spiritual life, just taking what you said, how important is it for us to have a clear understanding of our own tendency, our own inclination?
Very important, but you needn't bother so much. You see, Hinduism itself, especially in the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition, it's so broad and so vast, so that you will notice that when you come into this tradition, you have a devotional approach. You have an Ishta Devata and Ishta Mantra. You have the Vedantic teachings. You have meditation. You have service, Karma Yoga. And as we do these things, you will find some of these things seem alive to us. Some seem very interesting to us. Others, maybe we are doing it mechanically. So for some, devotion is something that really motivates us, makes us feel alive and progressing in spiritual life. Whereas the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, might feel theoretical, philosophical, speculative. For others, it's the path of knowledge which seems most evident, most clear, most rational, and easy actually. So it depends upon your nature. One of these paths, one or more will feel alive and interesting, and the rest are also there. Now it's not a problem with the path, it's because of our own innate nature. So automatically our nature becomes evident as we do sadhana. But the insight was that it's very good to do all of them. Swami Vivekananda's insight that the harmony of the four yogas is important. Some of the yogas may not be to your taste, may not be to your liking, but it's still good to do that because it's not a fault of the yoga, it's a fault of our own mental makeup. Right? So as we practice that, it's very beneficial for us.
Okay, Maharaj. Then the next question I wanted to ask, and I think this is something that I've mentioned in many of your talks, that this self could be, what you use, this non-dual consciousness is available right here and right now. It's not a journey in time and not a journey in space, right here and right now. So, to our spirit, could we add something? Is it available right here, right now, provided that we have Chitta Shuddhi? Or can someone experience it right here, right now, without purification of mind, without being established in sadhana chatushtaya, in ethical discipline? Can it still be experienced right here and right now?
That is actually a difficult question. Answer is both yes and no. You see, it's like this. When we start in religious life, one approach is God realization. But the way it is taught to us is that God exists. And how do I know that? Because Mahapurushas say so, because the scriptures of the world say so, because Thakur is saying this, that God exists. We take it on faith. That there is something, someone, some power, some reality called God. But it's not something that we are experiencing. We are told to take it on faith, be devoted to God, believe in God, worship God, surrender to God. And this is the path of faith, the path of bhakti. This is one path. Another path comes, the path of mystical experience, the path of yoga. Patanjali Yoga comes there and says, no, not faith, not just belief. Here are these exercises, these psychophysical exercises. Sit in this way, breathe in this way, concentrate in this way, you will have the experience. As Swami Vivekananda says, if God exists, I should be able to see God. If I have an immortal soul, I should be able to feel it. How did Narendranath Datta become Vivekananda? He goes to Sri Ramakrishna and he asks, no, he does not ask, sir, does God exist? He says, no, have you seen God? So this is an approach which is peculiarly appealing to the modern man, to the modern mindset, that can we actually see God? See means experience God. So that's another approach. What kind of experience? Special experience. See, when Sri Ramakrishna is seeing Ma Kali, others around him are not seeing Ma Kali. They see that Sri Ramakrishna is seeing something which we cannot see, and Sri Ramakrishna is talking to the mother. There are many such descriptions in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in Kathamrita. But the people around him are not seeing Ma Kali. They are seeing that Sri Ramakrishna is in ecstasy. Sri Ramakrishna is experiencing some divinity somewhere. That is called mystical experience. In Samadhi, in Bhava, you have this extraordinary experience. They are real also. You experience these things. Now the problem with faith, with devotion is, it can be challenged. That you are just believing something. But even the problem with mystical experiences, it can still be challenged. If you say, Sri Ramakrishna is seeing God, what was the challenge? Many people in Dakshineshwar, what did they think? Ottatta Pagal. Sri Ramakrishna is somebody who is crazy, he is mad. And people used to think that. Modern neuroscientists will say, we don't doubt that you are experiencing God, but it's just actually you're not experiencing. You feel, you think that. It's just some little stroke in your brain, some kind of problem, or you have taken some LSD, ganja, something like that. They call it, you are high and you are experiencing something. You feel you are experiencing it. We don't doubt you feel that, but that does not mean that you're actually seeing God or you're actually one with the universe. No. So even mystical experience can be doubted. Okay. In contrast to the path of bhakti, in contrast to the path of mystical experience, I want to show you the uniqueness of the path of Advaita Vedanta, path of knowledge. Here is something which is not something you are supposed to believe in. Vishwasna, not believe in it. It's something that we are always continuously experiencing. It's here. It's now. It's also not something extraordinary, that only some mystics have experienced it and then you will do sadhana and then you will experience. No. The claim is that you are experiencing it now. Advaita Vedanta does not say you sit and meditate in this way and you will get a peculiar experience. Then that will be the Advaitic experience. No. What does Advaita Vedanta say? When you look at Advaitic texts, Taittiriya Upanishad, Panchakosha Viveka, Drigdrishya Viveka, Avasthatraya Vichara, waking, dreaming, sleeping. Who is here, who is not awake? Although Vedanta, many might be asleep by now. But that's alright. Vedanta is very comfortable with that. Waking, dreaming, sleeping. If you've got waking, dreaming, sleeping, that's enough. It's a common experience. Everybody has it. And Advaita Vedanta says, the path of jnana says, that is enough to begin with. You don't need anything more than that. Just the experience of seer and seeing, subject and object. I am the experiencer and this is the experienced world. That much is enough. With that much, Advaita Vedanta can show you, can take you to Brahma Jnana, to the realization of the Absolute. Nothing more is required. But then, if waking, dreaming, sleeping is all that is required, or subject-object, then we should all be enlightened by now. But no. What happens is you have that, then Vedanta will take you step by step to show you your innermost reality. Now, the point is that your question was, so is that enough? Without any kind of preparation one will become enlightened? No, then the answer will be no. It is enough provided one is ready. Provided the mind is prepared, the instrument is prepared, then the teachings which will point it out to you will work. And you will realize, oh, this is what is meant by Brahman. This is who I am. This is my real nature. It was always there. I never saw it earlier. And this experience is enough to free us from suffering. But that will come only when the mind is prepared. If the mind is not prepared, what will happen? I've seen it. Either, the reaction to the Advaitic teaching. One reaction will be not interested. Ki je bolche matha mundu kichu bojha gelo na. I remember once I was giving a talk in Belur Math. After that, as usual I talked about Advaita Vedanta. After that somebody came and afterwards said, I'll tell you in Bengali first and translate. He said, Maharaj, apni ja bollen kothagulo to bhalo, ekটু Ram, ekটু Krishna মিশিয়ে দিলে খুব ভালো হতো. What you said, Swami, was very good. But you add a little Rama, a little Krishna, then it would be perfect. Now, there's no interest. That's one reaction. Another reaction is, it's very interesting, but I don't understand it. Another reaction is, it's interesting, I understand it, but it's not real for me. I have understood it intellectually. It's not a living reality for me. Advaita Vedanta at that point would say, even intellectually also you have not understood it. If you keep at it, if you follow it carefully, you will see it's describing a reality here and now, already present, fully present. So these reactions are the sign of lack of mental preparation. And that preparation is provided by that sadhan chatushta sampatti. Vivek, vairagya, shat sampatti, then mumukshutva. So and for this sadhana is required. Karma yoga helps, bhakti yoga helps, dhyana helps. So karma, bhakti, dhyana, all these are very helpful. Classical Advaita Vedanta gives full value, full importance to all sorts of sadhana, but as preparation for the ultimate breakthrough which only jnana can give.
Maharaj, I'd just like to go back a little bit, because you did mention in your article that one thing about Advaita Vedanta is that it does not require any faith, right? Now I remember in Swamiji's Raja Yoga, he talked about Raja Yoga as it's very scientific, it does not require any faith. Now the question is that, does not Advaita Vedanta require this faith in the Shastras, faith in the Guru's Vakya, Shastra Vakya? Can one realize the self without having faith, without having understood the nature of Brahman as expounded in the Upanishads? I think it Brahma Sutras 1.3, Shastra Yoni Twat, and I think Shankara gives an explanation that this, yes, the nature of the self, the nature of the Atman can only be understood by the scriptures and nothing else. Can you please comment upon that?
Right. In the Sadhan Chatushta, the basic qualifications for Vedanta, you will find Shat Sampatti, sixfold treasure. Sama, Dhamma, Titiksha, Uparati, Samadhana, and one of them is Shraddha. So deep faith in the teachings of Shastra, Guru and Shastra. Yeah. I remember this funny story that one Babaji in Vrindavan, Vaishnav Babaji, he decided enough of Krishna. I want to become an Advaitin. So he went to an Advaita teacher. And so Advaita teacher started. First lesson is always Sadhan Chatushta Sampatti, Vivek, Vairagya and all. So when he came to the sixfold treasure, Shama, Dhamma, Titiksha, Uparati, Samadhana, Shraddha. Then that sadhu is saying in Hindi, I'll tell you in Hindi and translate. The sadhu said, यहाँ पर भी श्रद्धा तो मेरा गिरिधर गोपाल क्या दोष किए थे? अच्छा एखानेও শ্রদ্ধা দরকার তাহলে আমার কৃষ্ণ কি দোষ করেছিল? So what is the fault of my poor Krishna that I thought everything there is based on Shraddha. Here let me follow a logical path. But here also they are talking about Shraddha. But there's a difference. There's a difference. In a faith-based approach, in a bhakti-based approach, you have to start with faith. From the very beginning you cannot question. So in a bhakti-based approach you have to start with faith. And for a long time it will be faith-based. Ultimately you will have your proof. But in the Advaitic approach, the faith is, I just call it a working faith. It's nothing very different from what you do when you go into a university. If you go to a university, Calcutta University, and then if your approach is, the teachers are liars and the textbook is fake news, then you will never learn anything. what is our approach? When I go to the classroom, the teacher is telling me something, the textbooks are telling me something, I don't get it. Let me study a little more, let me think about it, then I'll get it. That much faith is necessary in Advaita Vedanta. But that won't do for a Bhakti approach. In Bhakti approach, a total faith is necessary. And for a very long time, see, in Advaita Vedanta, you must ask questions. You must ask questions to understand what is being said. Because understanding is vital for Advaita to work. Okay. You cannot say that, Babaji, your face is so beautiful, your beard is very long and white, and therefore I believe you. That will not work in Advaita Vedanta. I must understand what is being said.
Okay, well, just want to make a comment. That idea, can someone realize the self without knowing the nature of the Upanishads? One example of that might be Latu Maharaj. When he heard Angushta Matra, when he heard some, that's it. But for the common person, is it possible or not possible without knowing the nature of the Upanishad, without having studied the Upanishads, to realize the self?
Teaching is necessary.
Okay.
See, the Vedantic approach is basically a knowledge system, and that knowledge has to be transmitted. It doesn't literally have to be the Upanishads in the original Sanskrit. You have to be a Sanskrit Pandit and you go through the Vedic study and then go to a guru and the classical way.
Sure.
Not necessarily. It could be in Bengali.
Sure.
It could be in English. It requires a competent guru and a competent student, and the teaching to be transmitted in that way.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's that much teaching is necessary. It can't be done without that. That's basically, I think, in principle what Shankara means, that it comes through the Upanishads. The basic knowledge has to come from there.
In law, we have something, giving the benefit of the doubt. Giving the benefit of that. You can't deny it, it's not there, but it has to be proven. So giving the benefit of the doubt that it's a possibility.
Definitely. Like Latu Maharaj, for example.
Okay.
And there are so many examples of people who have not studied the Upanishads in the classical way, who may not know even Sanskrit, but they have become enlightened. So, but in many cases they have been taught. There are a very few cases, even without any specific teaching, spontaneously some have become enlightened. A few examples are there. But then we will say that the mind was already prepared in past lives, and also it was just a matter of fruition in this life. But in general, your question was for the general masses.
Right.
See, as long as Upanishadic teachings are available, whether in the book or with a teacher or on YouTube or whatever it is, it's good to take advantage of that.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the end of the theoretical portion.
Oh.
And now we want to go to we'll take questions afterwards, but let's just, now let's go to because I want to also give equal time to the practical portion. Maharaj, a lot of people, and this is going to regard what you mentioned in your article. Maharaj in his article mentioned 3 types of vicharas. This Drisha Viveka, second one Avasthatraya, and Panchakosha. So Maharaj, we've seen your videos. I've personally seen so many of your videos, and so have many devotees. So one of the things they say is that, when Maharaj says it in the lecture, it feels so right, I can do it. And afterwards, when I go into my meditation hall, then yes, I am that self. But when it's in real time, say we're in the workplace, we're in the home, and that pain body, that klesha gets triggered, at that time, forget about the vichara, we're in unconscious mode. So, in law we do this. We give some hypotheticals and we ask you to determine the efficacy and utility of the law, apply analysis, show us how to think these things through. So I'll just give you some common examples. One is that, say in the workplace, anywhere, our sense of fairness gets offended. We might feel like we're being discriminated against, a second-class citizen, whatever it may be. So many types of examples. So at that time, what you're saying is really nice when the mind is without these kleshas, right? But most of us were not established in sadhana chatushtaya all the time. So this goes to the practicality of Advaita Vedanta as a practical philosophy. So please guide us through using one of the prakriyas, one of the methodologies. So say I'm in the workplace and my boss calls me a liar. So at that time my mind goes blank and I just want to react. The idea of even being conscious, how do we first, because you talked in your article about like a small gap opening up. You mentioned a small gap. How do we create some type of a gap in this first example? Please apply any of the prakriyas if our sense of fairness gets offended.
Yeah, the prakriyas means methods. Drigdrishya Viveka is a prakriya, the method of the seer and the seen. Panchakosha Viveka is a prakriya, the method of the 5 layers of the human personality. You know, the body, the pranic body, the mind, the intellect, and the causal body, the Anandamaya. Or waking, dreaming, deep sleep, the analysis. Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, and the Turiya as the witness of all of these. That's another prakriya. But actually, you know, there is only one prakriya. At the heart of all of this, Advaita Vedanta has basically only one prakriya. That is called Adhyaropa Apavada. It's the heart of Advaita Vedanta. Adhyaropa Apavada means superimposition, desupperimposition. Swami Vivekananda called it hypnotization, dehypnotization. Now we are already hypnotized. So we have to dehypnotize ourselves. You see, all of them, what they basically do is, first of all, they will tell you something about which we already accept about our life. For example, we accept waking, dreaming, deep sleep. They will first of all point out this waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Here you are the waker, this is your waking world. Now imagine you fall asleep, then there will be a dream world, and there will be deep sleep, and this is your experience. We say, yes, yes. Then from there, they will go, neti, neti, not this, and show you something which you did not know earlier. By a process of, it's called apavada, by the process of neti, neti. All of these prakriyas have that. Whether it is avasthatraya, vichara, drigdrishya, viveka, panchakosha, first of all, they will show you something that is very commonplace. Our body-mind complex, panchakosha. And then by neti, neti, they will show you panchakosha vilakshana atma, the witness consciousness, which is a witness of the 5 layers of the human personality. So all of these, basically, all these prakriyas are adhyaropa, apavada, superimposition, desupperimposition. Practically, how will we apply it? Don't.
Okay.
Don't. See, Advaita Vedanta is the highest knowledge. Is sort of, it's the final, I call it the finishing school of spirituality. First of all, jato ichhe ঘুরে নিন জগতে সংসার, experience of the world, as quickly as possible, finish it. Finish it means দেখা হয়ে গেছে, mentally finish it. Physically some can become sannyasi, may not become sannyasi, but mentally all can rise above it. When we are talking about Advaita Vedanta, I'll say even if you're not a monk physically, everybody has to become monk-like inside. You have to become a sadhaka or sadhika inside. So, having done that, then also everything else, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, raja yoga, all of that, your tantra, kundalini, mindfulness, vipassana, this is a supermarket of spirituality. Ja korar as whatever you like, quickly go through that. Advaita Vedanta is there. It's the final, last word in spiritual life. It's finishing school of spirituality. When you have seen all of that, and then you come to Advaita Vedanta with a mature mind, with a calm mind, with a relaxed mind, then you will begin to see what Advaita Vedanta is telling us. Once we realize that, once we get an understanding of that, practical application will flow by itself. So, when you say mindfulness meditation, if my boss is calling me a liar, what will you say? Now, first of all, immediately become aware of your breathing. Boss is calling me liar. Breathing in, anger. Breathing out, anger is going out. That's the technique they will give. Not bad, not bad. It will work. It's practical, that's practical. from a bhakti approach. My concern is with my Lord, my beloved Lord, my Krishna, my Rama, my Ramakrishna. What anybody else in the world said, if it hurts me, I will offer it to my Lord. If somebody says something nice, I will offer it to my Lord. My connection is with my Lord, is with my Ishta Devata. I am not so concerned about what. See, if I lose my connection with my Ishta Devata, the day I do not think about God, that day is wasted. That makes me unhappy. If I am thinking about my Lord, my problems in the world, I will keep on offering it at the feet of my Lord. I am fine with it. I am fine with it. Just yesterday, I heard something very beautiful from one of our monks about Swami Mumukshanandaji, who was here. Some of you may have seen him. He was the president of Advaita Ashrama many years ago. I mean, the first time I came to Advaita Ashrama 30 years ago, he was here as the president of the Advaita Ashrama. Just before he passed, one of the monks who told me this story, she said, Maharaj Mokshanji was being wheeled along on his wheelchair in Belur Math few days before he passed away. And he was very sick and a lot of problems in the body and a lot of suffering. But he was talking as usual very sweetly with this monk. And this monk said to him, Maharaj, khub kashto hocche. Ami shunechi, I have heard that you are in a lot of suffering. Then Maharaj said to, listen to this, those who are bhaktas, how do you deal with suffering? I've heard this yesterday, I will repeat it for many, many years to come. You are the first group to whom I'm repeating this. Maharaj said, I'll tell you in Bengali, the original, then translate. Ke boleche tomake je ami koshte achi? Bhagavan bhaktoke kokhono koshto den na. যে ভাবে যে ভগবান আমাকে কষ্ট দিচ্ছেন সে ভগবত প্রেমী নয়, ভগবত দ্বেষী। আমাকে প্রভু কষ্ট দিচ্ছেন না, শরীরের কষ্ট আছে, আমি আনন্দে আছি, আমি আমার প্রভুকে নিয়ে আনন্দে আছি। This attitude is such a tremendous attitude. It's a lesson we should all learn. We are all bhaktas. Most of us, we have got mantra diksha, ishta devata, and most of us, we will face some challenges in life. Remember, in no scripture has God said that there will be no challenge in life. Never. এটা একটা আমাদের মন গড়া চিন্তা যে আমি যেহেতু ভক্ত আমার কোনো ঝামেলা হবে না জীবনে, কখনো ভগবান বলেননি এটা। In Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, Tan titikshasva, agama apai, these things come and go, heat and cold, pain and pleasure, man apaman, লাভ লোকসান যেগুলো হবে, all these come and go. What will you do? Will God protect you from that? No. শ্রীকৃষ্ণ একদম কোনো গ্যারান্টি দেননি। উনি বলছেন তান তিতিক্ষ, সহ্য করে যাও। প্রাপ্য ইমাম আসুখম লোকম ভজস্ব মাম, হ্যাভিং অ্যাটেইনড টু দিস ওয়ার্ল্ড অফ সরো, ওয়ার্শিপ মি। ভগবান বুদ্ধের এই জগৎটা দুঃখময়। Having attained to bodhi enlightenment, you will go beyond suffering. Not that the suffering will cease. The world will go on in its own way. Old age will come, disease will come, death will come. You must learn to rise above it with the help of spirituality. It's a great lesson to learn. Bhagavan kakhono bhaktoke dukkha den na. Je seta bhabche she bhagavad dveshi. You become a hater of God, not a lover of God. The lover of God is happy with the love of God. জগতে কি হলো, শরীরে কি হলো, মনের মধ্যে কি হলো, I don't care. I am fine. A lesson. This is the lesson to be learned. This is the practical approach in bhakti. The practical approach in karma yoga. I am answering your question. Practical approach in karma yoga is that my attitude is the welfare of all. অন্যদের মঙ্গল হোক, let all be happy. What can I do for you? So my own little problems are not of much importance. If I practice this for months and years in my life, you'll see that your own problems will diminish. It will not matter much. Anybody, যে অন্যদের সাহায্য করে, those who take care of others, even in a family, you will see they ignore their own problems. If a lot of people depend on you, You are fortunate, so that you will ignore your own little problems, because you have to do for them. Now, what is the practical approach in Advaita Vedanta? So I have talked about practical approach, Vipassana meditation, mindfulness, in bhakti, in karma yoga. In dhyana yoga, the approach is more difficult. But the trick is that the mind can dwell on one thing at a time. Mon ekta jinishke dharana korte pare, ektar beshi noy. Now using this, what dhyana yoga does is, then let that one thing be God or the Atman, not the body, not the pain, not the problem in the world. Immediately focus on one thing, everything else will be excluded. And Swami Turiyananda ji, when the operation is going on, he says, he takes his mind away from that pain. He has the power to withdraw the mind. That requires a lot of practice of dhyana. That is the approach in dhyana yoga. Not to attend to that miserable problem, but to train the attention so that you can focus on the... Yeah.
So let me just stop right there, Maharaj. So give us something then that, because many people are experiencing constant pain, say as we get older especially, you might be feeling arthritis, some type of constant pain. Give us something. Give us something practical that, forget about the philosophy, just give us something practical, how to deal with that pain, how to create a small type of gap. And the reason why I say this, why I'm pushing Maharaj, Maharaj was my acharya for 2 years, and we've known, he doesn't react, so I'm kind of trying to poke the honeycomb a little bit. I don't mind, Maharaj. I just
yes.
want something experiment with truth.
I thought I was talking about practical things.
We want personal practical things.
Yes. Paracetamol খাবে আর কি করবে? Yeah. No, I personally, if you ask me, I personally feel the most practical thing is Advaita Vedanta. For me, I don't know. That is the reality. Baki সব আসবে যাবে. You can go into meditation and come out of meditation. A devotional feeling may come, may not come. Your service of others, that attitude may be there, but one time it may come that amar kichu holo na, I didn't get, that feeling may come. But throughout it all, whether you are selfish or unselfish, you are aware. Whether you are in deep meditation or mind is scattered, you are aware. Whether your heart is full of devotion or dry, you are aware. That awareness is what Advaita Vedanta focuses on. That awareness which is effortless, always there. Right now it is there. It's choiceless. You cannot do anything about it. You cannot drive it away. You cannot invite it in. It's always there. Advaita Vedanta introduces us to the perfection of that awareness, to the oneness of that awareness. You say this is theoretical. No. It's actually very practical. Once we begin to understand what that awareness is, the one who scolded me, and I, the person who have been scolded, the one who is angry with me, and I, in whose mind there is pain and unhappiness, I see that I am the awareness illumining this pain, unhappiness in this mind. But I am the same awareness there. I cannot, whom will I hate? Will I hate that body? Will I hate that mind? But will I hate that awareness? That awareness is I, the same awareness. So this sounds theoretical, philosophical. If it sounds theoretical, philosophical, then go back to Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Listen again carefully until it becomes real and practical. Once it becomes real and practical to you, then you don't have to make any effort. Automatically you can apply it in every situation that comes up in life.
Okay. One more question, Maharaj, and then we'll take questions from the audience. I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to go back into one theoretical question, theoretical, practical. That in our tradition, we talk about Shiva Jnani Jiva Sheva. Now, in this concept of this practicing witness consciousness, Swamiji gave a great amount of stress to expansion of the heart. That's actually the main test of spirituality, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, at least expansion of the heart. it seems that even these prakriyas you suggested, they're cutting the reality. But so how does that invoke compassion? How does that invoke empathy? How does that invoke oneness? It seems like it's cutting.
That's a good question actually. What he's asking is, when you do something like Drigdrishya Viveka, I am not the body, I am not the mind, I am the witness of the body and mind, you are sort of withdrawing away from the world. Separating. Neti neti. So how does that help you in expanding in the feeling of oneness? This is not oneness. This is actually right now the division is between I am this and you are all separate from me. And when you do Drigdrishya Viveka, I say even body is separate from me. The thoughts in the mind are also separate from me. But still it is not oneness. Ekatva to holo na. This is not Advaita. This has to be understood. This Drigdrishya Viveka, Panchakosha Viveka, Avasthatraya Vichara. The first step is Neti Neti. This is Sankhya. Advaita will be the next step. In Aparoksha Anubhuti there is a verse. After separating Atma, Anatma Vichara, separating self from not self, Shankaracharya says in that verse, even the dualists, the Nayayikas and all, they do the same thing. What has been attained by this? Then he goes next to say how to attain oneness. So from here, now we must ask the question, after doing Drigdrishya Viveka, what have we got? I am the witness consciousness. Everything else is separate from me. I am separate from everything else. But now we must ask the question, I have separated myself from everything else. I am separate from everything, but is everything separate from me? One sadhu put it very nicely in Hindi. He says, Drashta so drishya se alag hai. Drishya kya drashta se alag hai? What you see, you the seer, you are different from what you see. Correct. That's Drigdrishya Viveka. But now the question is, what all this you have separated from yourself, is it really separate from you? You might say, ekই রকম কথা, একটা জিনিস যদি আরেকটা জিনিস থেকে আলাদা হয়, ওটাও তো এটার থেকে আলাদা হবে। এই বোতলটা যদি টেবিলের থেকে আলাদা হয়, টেবিলটাও তো বোতলের থেকে আলাদা। Then what are you asking? But imagine, table and the wood, water and wave, gold and ornament. Water is different from the wave. What do I mean by that? Water can exist without being a wave. It can exist as water vapor, it can exist as water in the bottle. It's not a wave. But wave cannot exist without being water. Wave is not different from water. Ornament is not different from gold. What you see in your dreams, you are different from what you see in your dreams. But what you have seen in your dreams is not different from you. It cannot exist without you, the dreamer. Similarly, you, the witness consciousness, and whatever you are aware of, are they two different entities or one? You as the witness consciousness, you are different from what you experience. But what you experience is not different from you. If the two are different, you have got Sankhya, Prakriti Purusha. But if you say that whatever I experience is experienced by the awareness, in the awareness, and not different from the witness awareness, that is Advaita Vedanta. This sounds philosophical, but it's an answer to your question. How does that lead to expansion of heart? When you complete this process, you see this oneness. Upon this oneness is based compassion, not even compassion, Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva. If it is one divinity, then the sick person whom you are treating with medicine, the poor person, the hungry person whom you are giving food, the illiterate person whom you are giving education, the same divinity is present in all of them. And you are worshipping that divinity through your service.
So Maharaj, so then I think what you're saying that the prakriya of Advaita Vedanta is neti neti, and the anubhav, the realization, leads to iti iti.
No, the practice is both. Okay, Advaita Vedanta is not complete until you have reached the witness consciousness and then the oneness of everything with the witness consciousness. Then only Advaita Vedanta is accomplished. Advaita means non-dual. Until you reach non-duality. Now what you are talking about, the compassion, the service, the Shiva Jnana Jiva Seva, that is an extension of this. It's an implication of this. Something that Sri Ramakrishna draws out. Something that Swami Vivekananda draws out. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Actually, we're all Advaitins, but we want to, it's actually good to push these ideas because it brings further and further clarity to us. I think that's all the questions that I have. So now we can take questions from the audience. Is there a microphone?
So make the questions brief and one-pointed.
But let me add one caveat to that. The questions have to be based on what we've talked about during this discussion. It cannot be, I'm just drawing the boundaries. And like Maharaj said, it should be in one sentence.
Or 2 sentences.
Okay, 2 sentences.
So you have to guide them, tell them where the microphone should go to.
I think they're bringing the mic to her. Okay. Go ahead, please tell. Stand up, you can take the mic, take the mask off, please.
Tell us your name and ask the question. Hi. Okay. This is the whole question of Buddhism and Vedanta. The question she asked, Ranjana asked was, Narayana has come in the 10 incarnations, Dashavatar Stotrote ache. One of them is Buddha. And in Buddha avatar he comes and denies the existence of self and Ishvara. Seems to be direct contradiction of what Vedanta is saying. Is a Shunyavadi. From Shunya nothing is created. And here in Advaita Vedanta you're talking about consciousness, from which consciousness all this universe is created. So that's a fair summary of your question. How is then Buddha be an incarnation of Narayana who can teach these contradictory things and so on? Those are very interesting discussions are there on this. Now, straight away the answer, my immediate answer would be, you said from Shunya nothing is created, from the void. Of course, what is Shunyavada? That's a huge, huge question. Anyway, from Shunya nothing is created. But from consciousness also nothing is created. You said consciousness take a shrishti hai. From consciousness there is the creation of the universe. But nothing really is created. Gaudapada would say, from consciousness only consciousness is there. In your dream, for example, I'm giving an example. You see so many things. Then you later realize the mind itself appeared as the earth and the sky, as the people, as the events in your dream. Did the mind actually become sky and earth and people and places? Nothing. Their appearances in the mind. Exactly like that, what Advaita wants to say is, whatever we are seeing now has not actually been created. It's an appearance in consciousness. In consciousness there can only be appearances. Consciousness cannot actually become a physical thing out there. So there's the whole concept of a physical thing other than consciousness. From an Advaitic perspective, there's no such thing. If you follow, then there is really not much difference, almost no difference at all, between the final form of the Madhyamaka concept of Shunya and the Advaita concept of Purna. Amader Sharat Maharaj, Swami Sharadanandji, he says, Jake Bauddhara Shunna bole, takei amra Purna boli. All right.
Maharaj, just want to just expand upon that a little bit. You studied Buddhism at Harvard University. So I think in this Shunyavada, the ultimate reality, is it void or is it not anirvachaniya? It cannot be expressed.
That's a good point. A couple of years back,
I had this opportunity to study at Harvard University, and one of the courses that I took was a course on Indo-Tibetan Madhyamaka. Nearly 2,000 years of development of Shunyavada from Nagarjuna through Chandrakriti and one or two other Indian writers, Indian philosophers and saints, to the Tibetans. So 2,000 years of development of Shunya, from Sanskrit to Tibetan to almost incomprehensible English, from Nalanda to Tibet to Harvard University in over 2,000 years. It's very complex, this idea, but I'll tell you the very interesting thing. When I entered the class, Professor Garfield straight away told me, Swami, keep your Advaita outside the door. He knew, so keep your Advaita outside the door when we study Nagarjuna and Shunyavada. Fine. That means the two are different. They are not the same thing. He says that. Outside the classroom, one day I was walking down to Harvard Yard. I met this Tibetan Lama. Later I discovered that he is the Tibetan Buddhist, what you call the, Swami Chidekananda is there, the chaplain, the Tibetan Buddhist chaplain for Harvard University. His name is Lama Migmar. I saw him outside there and he looked at me and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm here studying your philosophy. Then he said, but you're an Advaita monk, are you not? I said, yes. And then he said with a big smile, oh, it is the same thing. এখন কি বলবেন আপনি? যিনি পণ্ডিত তিনি বলছেন দুটো আলাদা কিন্তু মেশাবেন না, আর যিনি সাধক তিনি বলছেন দুটোই এক কিন্তু একই জিনিস. Both are right. If you keep them apart, then you can understand each one in its own unique flavor. And then you realize in what sense they are pointing at the same thing. Yeah. That's my perspective.
I just wanted to take that just one step further. Vijnanavada, their conception of the ultimate reality, do they define the ultimate reality in Vijnanavada? Do they give any attributes to or does it come closer to Advaita Vedanta, this concept of Satchidananda?
Again, answer has to be a nuanced answer, yes and no. First of all, no. Shankaracharya has cut down Vijnanavada, which is the Chittamatra or mind-only school of Buddhism, has expended pages and pages of dialectics to cut down Vijnanavada. Its ultimate reality is not the mind. But if you take a closer look at what the mind-only school of Buddhism has to say, from the Tibetan perspective, for example, it points to the Advaitic idea of pure consciousness, actually. Yeah. Let's take another question.
Go ahead.
Naam bolun. Yes. Like, for example? All right, I think I've got the idea of the question. The question that Meetu is asking is, how do you know if consciousness is there even when you're not experiencing it? If I'm not experiencing consciousness, suppose, for example, deep sleep, coma. Now, deep sleep, it's a subtle question. Is it an experience or not? If it is an experience, then the consciousness must be there. Why we think that there is no consciousness is because we think of consciousness as activity of the mind. Therefore, when the mind is silent, we feel there is no consciousness. It feels like nothing. But it feels like nothing to what? In fact, if you can appreciate how there is consciousness in deep sleep also, you'll be able to understand better what the Advaita idea of consciousness is. Ekhane Golparke, several years back, nearly 20 years back, there was this conference on consciousness studies. And there was a neuroscientist, and there was Professor Larson, the Sankhya professor, an American. He was a scholar of Sankhya. Neuroscientists and the philosophers could not agree on the definition of consciousness. So finally, Professor Larson asked the neuroscientist who had come from Britain, "Doctor, what is your definition of consciousness in deep sleep? In deep sleep, is there consciousness or not?" And the doctor said, "No. We have an operational definition of consciousness, and the idea is that there is no consciousness in deep sleep." And Professor Larson said, according to Sankhya, there is only consciousness in deep sleep. So this is the difference. There is only consciousness in deep sleep, nothing to be conscious of. Because there is nothing to be conscious of, it feels like nothing. I give the example of light coming through space to the earth. When you look at outer space between sun and the earth, it looks black, dark, but it's full of light. Sunlight is streaming through that. When a comet passes through that, you see the tail of the comet light up, brilliant light. Now, has the comet got its own internal light? No. It's sunlight, which is there in that so-called seeming darkness of space. But when there's nothing to reflect that light, it seems dark. When the comet passes through it, that reflects the already existing sunlight, and then it blazes forth. Similarly, if no object is available, even if consciousness is there, there will be no anubhava, no experience. Now, even blankness can be conceived of as an object. Then there is an experience of blankness. That's why I say deep sleep is not an absence of experience, it's an experience of absence. So, even when we think that there is consciousness is not being experienced, that blankness is also proof of the existence of consciousness. Only thing is, when does it function as a proof? Only when the mind becomes active and then starts questioning, when I was asleep, was there consciousness or not? And the answer will be, if I was asleep, if there's the perception of blankness, then there must have been consciousness. The mind comes to that understanding. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay, what's your name? Abhirop. How does that blankness get recorded in the mind? It's a good question, actually. So now we enter into a little bit of Advaita, I would say, back calculation. Because Advaita will now try to wriggle out of these difficult questions. What they do is there in Vedanta Sara. Ati sukshma bhi ajnana vritti bhi. This is the language used in Vedanta Sara. By extremely subtle movements of ajnana. See, the basic idea is deep sleep, what's there? Consciousness. Sakshi Chaitanya is shining, as always. Mind has been resolved back into ajnana, into the Anandamaya. So only ajnana is there in deep sleep. But ajnana is also dynamic. Ajnana means ignorance. It's also dynamic. It's made of three gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas. And they are in perpetual motion. These are called the vrittis of ajnana. And they are called ati sukshma ajnana vritti. Extremely subtle. Why extremely subtle? Subtle, sukshma vritti is mind. So compared to the mind, ajnana is even more subtle. So by these extremely subtle movements, the experience of deep sleep is also recorded. Normal experience is recorded in memory, but memory is not functioning in deep sleep. But ajnana is there. So it's an ajnana vritti. You might say this is like, trying to match the accounts. And there's this joke about interviews going on. And the first person, for the candidate for the interview, the question was, what is 2 plus 2? The first person was an engineer, immediately did some calculation, slide rule and all, and he said, it is between 3.9 and 4.1, somewhere in between. So like that, every person comes and gives some kind of answer according to their profession. Accountant comes. What is 2 plus 2? He went and closed the door and whispered, how much do you want it to be? আপনার কত চাই মশাই বলুন. So Advaita Vedanta, like that back calculation, somehow if you are saying that the experience of deep sleep, it must be recorded otherwise. But anyway, jokes apart, I'll just give you a hint here. We don't have time here. It's a very subtle and extremely interesting point. When we wake up, we say, I was asleep, I had no experience at that, I had this experience of blankness at that time. Sushupti, deep sleep. I did not know anything. But here is the question, and this is a subtle question. The one who's saying, I was asleep, I did not experience anything, it was a blankness. Who is saying this? The mind. But the mind was asleep at that time. Mind did not experience that blankness. The experience of the witness consciousness, just the witness consciousness by itself, illumining ajnana, is now assumed by the mind. And the mind says, I experienced blankness in deep sleep. It did not experience blankness in deep sleep. If you can make this distinction between the mind's experience and what was there before the mind was experiencing in deep sleep, you will get a very good clue into what Sakshi Chaitanya is. It's a very, you get an idea of what I'm trying to say. It's a very subtle point, but a very interesting point. The mind is telling a lie when it says, I was in deep sleep at that time. You were not there at all to record this kind of experience. Good. Should we go there?
Yes.
Yeah. What's your name? Yes. Children can, straight answer would be no. We live in here, and especially in the West and more increasingly here, we live, in my view, unfortunately in a child worshipping age. Whatever wisdom now children say, it spouts from their mouth, it's wisdom. No, it's not. It's basically nonsense. And we should pay no attention to it. But it is also true that children are often quite spiritual. That spirituality sort of disappears in most cases as they grow up, or it is covered over by worldliness as they grow up. In some cases it does not. So children sometimes have a very direct way of, not only Advaita, anything in life, they can confront it in a very direct, naive, straightforward, honest way. That's why Advaita might be not so difficult for a child. The principle of it. That's all I want to say.
Go ahead.
Ki naam bolun? Abhishek. I see what you are saying. All right. I'll just take only a part of your question, not the whole thing. Sit down. The difference between, say, a living body and a dead body. He just said something interesting. That was not his main question, but he has raised an interesting point. Did you hear what he said? That in a dead body there is no consciousness. But if you say Brahman is consciousness, Brahman is everywhere, then in a dead body also Brahman should be there. Consciousness should be there in the dead body. But in dead body there is no consciousness. Here we must make a difference between the consciousness Brahman as such and the reflected consciousness in the mind, Chidabhasa. Yeah. So what's the difference between a living body and a dead body? As you said, in a dead body also there is a brain, there is a nervous system. What has happened? The difference is this, from a Vedantic perspective, that right now in a living body there is a physical body, that is called Sthula Sharira. There is also a subtle body called Sukshma Sharira. Sthula Sharira is the actual physical body which you can see, which a doctor can examine. And the Sukshma Sharira, in Vedanta, it has got 19 parts. It consists of the Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. Their consciousness is reflected. Atma, Chaitanya, is reflected there, and that reflected consciousness is the awareness which we are all feeling right now. Right now we are all feeling aware. It's that reflected consciousness. The original consciousness, the Sakshi Chaitanya, is reflected in the subtle body, just like your face is reflected in a mirror. Now when the body dies, physical body dies, what it means is the subtle body goes away. The prana, it leaves, along with the mind and the other parts of the subtle body. That's why we say, pran chole gache. Literally. So the idea is that the pranamaya kosha, manomaya, vijnanamaya, along with the anandamaya, it has gone. And the reflected consciousness travels with that. So wherever it goes, that place will feel conscious. This will not feel conscious anymore. But Brahman is still there. Whenever there is a subtle body, it will be reflected. So that's the difference between living being and non-living being in Advaita Vedanta. Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss is everywhere. Or rather, everywhere is in Satchidananda. All space is in Satchidananda. All time is in Satchidananda. All objects are in Satchidananda, including bodies. But those bodies which have got a subtle body in them, they become what we call living beings, sentient beings. And their consciousness is manifest. This is the difference.
I think we're going to take, how many other questions? 2. Okay.
Or no? All right. So he's asking a question, please sit, about pain. For example, he says that suppose we have pain and we take a painkiller. What does it do? So there's one way of eliminating pain. We take a painkiller, it actually suppresses the physical signals in the in our nerves so that we don't feel that pain. It's not presented to consciousness, presented to the mind. Those signals are not presented. That's what a painkiller does. It suppresses that. Now what would yoga do in that case? It takes the attention away. The nerves are functioning as such and they are transmitting the impulse of pain. The message of pain is being transmitted. But the attention of the mind is so powerfully engaged in some object, maybe meditating on the Ishta Devata or something, that there is no, let's say, bandwidth of awareness left over to register that pain. It can happen to anybody. If you are totally focused on something, even a little kid who is totally focused on a cricket match in the TV, a mosquito is biting, may not feel it. Because attention is so much focused there. But mosquito is actually biting, the nerves are working, feeling of pain is there, everything is there. But he does not register because the attention is focused on something else. That's one way. What is the Advaitic way? The pain is there, the nerves are transmitting pain, mind is registering pain, feeling of pain is there, but you realize I am this unaffected awareness which illumines this experience of pain. Awareness itself is not in pain. There is pain, but the awareness, am entirely free of pain. When Sri Ramakrishna was asked by Turiyanandaji, Hari, that, sir, how are you today? And Sri Ramakrishna said, there is pain here, I cannot eat. And then Hari said to him, Turiyanandaji, he said to him that, Kintu ami to dekhchi apni maha anande achen. You are in great bliss. What did Sri Ramakrishna say? O shala dhore niyeche. The rascal has found me out. Now, is it that he does not feel pain? Cancer e jantrona ki anubhav korchen na uni. He is feeling. It's not a painkiller. It's not even the yogic training of attention so that the attention is somewhere and I cannot feel the pain. No. He is feeling the pain as much as any cancer patient. But also, he knows at a much more fundamental level, I am the awareness which makes this pain experience possible, which in itself is always free of pain. At that level, I'm perfectly all right. Ami purno, ami anande achi. It's a very interesting thing. So these are different ways of looking at the same phenomenon.
Maharaj, one question you have.
Yes. Please tell us your name. Yeah. All right. The first question, so she is a student of Vedanta, there's no doubt about it. Then I'm the only one to blame. Yes. So the two questions, the second one is actually quite technical. The first one is easy to answer. Her question was that Ishvara, God, in Advaita Vedanta, Saguna Brahman, is formless, with qualities, auspicious qualities of omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and so on, and many other qualities. So consciousness associated with Maya, limited by Maya, is Ishvara, is formless. So when a sadhaka sees forms, Sri Ramakrishna sees Ma Kali, for example, Mirabai sees Krishna, you see different forms. Whose forms? If God is formless, then whose forms are? The answer is pretty easy. The forms are of God. That which is formless can assume any number of forms. So all the forms seen by sadhakas is a manifestation of that divinity in that particular form for the benefit of the sadhaka. This is Sri Ramakrishna's example of the formless water alone appears as ice, and the ice can have many, many forms. Because in Bhaktir Hime, by the very interesting example. So by the intense devotion of the devotee, the form is assumed. But whose form? It is the form belonging to water only. So it's not our imagination. But yes, your devotion has a role to play. Out of grace, that power will appear to you in that particular form. And that form belongs to God. Bhavanujay. So your contribution is there, definitely. Another example Sri Ramakrishna gives is photographic plate. He saw photographic and he was very impressed by that. And he said, mashlas, that silver nitrate, when you smear it on the plate and light comes through it, pictures are developed on it. Forms are developed on it. In that way, if you smear your mind with bhakti mashladi, with the coloring of bhakti, that Satchidananda will appear to you in the form which you want to experience it in. Otherwise, he says, just white light streams through the glass, photographic glass. Similar, that white light is Satchidananda. The second question you asked, straight answer would be yes. I'm not going to discuss the question or the answer to that. Yes, your understanding is correct. It is the same reality which appears as samsara, as jagat, and which is itself directly understood to be Brahman when jnana, when knowledge arises. That you put it in a very technical form, the question. Should we end with that?
Yeah. Well, okay, we'll take one, but actually this is one question I wanted to ask you as well.
Yes.
This concept of bhav, emotion, we always restrict that to bhakti. Can that also be used in Advaita Vedanta?
So this is a good question. When we say bhava, we think it's something related to bhakti. But can you use it in Advaita Vedanta? I am reminded of something a very great monk once said, not to me but to another monk, Swami Mokshadanandaji, Ram Maharaj, who was our acharya at one time, one of the most learned, very spiritually evolved Swamis I have ever met in my life. He said, and he was a non-dualist, Advaitin, he said, Advaito ekta bhav. Advaito ekta bhav. Normally we say bhav is bhakti, Advaita is something else. And that's the classical way of looking at it. It's knowledge, it's Gyan. Gyan is not a bhav. Gyan is reality itself. But he said Advaita itself is also another bhava of approaching that ultimate reality.
Can you please elaborate upon that? That's a very subtle statement he made. So,
I won't elaborate on it now because actually we have run out of time.
Okay, that's
but it's another way, just look at it this way. It's another way of approaching that ultimate reality. There are multiple bhakti ways of approaching that ultimate reality. We say, Bhakshalya bhav, then Dash bhav and all. And this Advaita bhav is something like the Shanta bhava, which is also a particular bhava.
okay. I think we're going to conclude for right now, and maybe this Advaita Bhav, Maharaj, we will want a part 2 in the future, if that's okay with you, Maharaj.
Absolutely.
After
that,
afterwards, now we're going to close off. So, should we make any announcements?
We'll make the announcement. No?
No?
We have run
okay.
out of time. Okay.
Okay. Then I just want to, it's getting late, but I just really, one thing, if you talk about the application of practical Vedanta, I hope you don't mind me. Maharaj today when he came, he looked jet-lagged because he just arrived 2 days ago. And even when he came here, he was very jet-lagged. So I was a little bit worried about the program. And I've seen this in his videos time and time again. He sometimes looks tired, but it's like he takes a tonic of Advaita Vedanta. It's like a B1 shot. And you can just see now that he's just illuminating all of us. So I want to thank you so much, Maharaj, for coming on. He has such a tight and busy schedule, and we're very grateful. And again, Maharaj, I hope you come again, either here or online in the near future.
Certainly, and thank you once again for having me. Thank you for coming out. I think this is the first in-person program in a long time in Advaita Ashrama. Thank you so much.